Welcome to Critical Video 5, Structuring an Argument. First, let's revisit what an academic argument is. An academic argument is a logically connected series of reasons, statements, or facts used to support or establish an idea or point of view. The purpose of an argument is to persuade the reader to accept a claim. To build your argument, you need two types of argument. First, there is the mega argument. And second, there is the micro argument, of which you will see there are several. The mega argument is the overall stance of the entire assignment. It's the essence of your conclusion. It's the thing you talk about in your introduction. It's where every paragraph leads towards. So, your micro-arguments are simply each of the paragraphs that leads towards that mega-argument. It's really important that all of this flows together. One reason must flow naturally from one to the other, and all of those things must flow towards the conclusion. The conclusion should not be a surprise. It should almost be inescapable. Your reader should know in which way they're going. You should be very clear with this from the start. As such, an argument that flows is more likely to persuade than one that maybe jumps haphazardly from one point to another. These can be very confusing for your reader to understand. So when you're developing your ideas, you always need to think, well, which ones are significant and how do they start to connect together? How can I order my arguments so that all of my ideas consistently move from one point to another in a way that makes sense? And finally, how can I write all of this in a very precise way so that my writing is very approachable and people will understand what I'm saying? Now, your arguments and structure do tend to get more complicated as the word limit increases. Those paragraphs or micro-arguments might start to fall into broader themes for the bigger and more complicated essays. But we still need to make sure we structure these in a way that is approachable. You can order your argument in several ways. You might go from the specific to the general, from small to big, simple to complex, less significant to more significant, or early to late chronological order. Sometimes there isn't necessarily an order that will jump out and you just need to address things in a way that you can still connect them together to make sense. If you go back to this diagram, of course, you may also realise you'll have several structures if one theme, for example, works chronologically, whereas another one works better from least to most significant. So this can vary throughout an essay. They still need to sit in that broad structure and make sense. The key thing to take away from this is that there's no set order to any argument. It's always dependent on the context and what you're trying to argue. However, no matter what structure or order you choose, you still need to connect the ideas together. Let's look at paragraphs in a bit more detail. In your assignment, you can use your word limit to help you structure your argument. Let's take the example of a 2,000 word assignment. Well, we want to make sure we save 10 to 15% of our words for our introduction. That takes away 200 to 300 words. We also need to save at least 10% for our conclusion, which is another 200 words. So, in total, that's 400 to 500 words off of our 2,000 word assignment. That leaves us roughly 1,500 to 1,600 words which we can use for our main body paragraphs, roughly 75 to 80% of the total count. Now, a perfect paragraph tends to be around 250 words long, so more broadly this can be between 200 and 300 words. However, if your paragraph is getting around the 280 mark, it is starting to get too long and you should really consider splitting it. It's useful to look at journals in your field and you'll notice paragraphs are shorter than you'd think. So if we take this example of a 2,000 word assignment, with a 200 to 300 word limit on each paragraph, That gives us roughly space for 6 or 7 main body paragraphs in our essay. This means we can only have 6 to 8 substantial points. If in our planning we come up with more, we simply do not have room in the assignment and we need to really consider which ones we need to take out. If we don't take something out, we'll end up with shorter paragraphs, unsubstantiated points, and short paragraphs that miss important elements of an argument. So let's look at paragraph structure. You may have seen point, evidence, explanation, link in other workshops or online guidance. The Peel structure is a really useful way to structure a paragraph. However, we can look at this through the lens of criticality. Point, which is what the paragraph's about, well, with criticality, this is your claim. When we're considering evidence, which is the referencing, they're just the premises that you're using to substantiate the point above. When we go to explanation or analysis, that is the persuasion, that is you analysing every piece of evidence that you've brought in and linking it back to the point. In doing so, you are persuading the reader of your argument. Additionally, we have the link. This tends to be where we link from one section to the next or to the overall topic of the essay. These are the little flags that lead us towards the mega argument. So, we could take this structure to help us plan out a paragraph. So in this one, my point is that raising divorce rates have been attributed to changes in the laws relating to marriage. I have lots of evidence for this, and you'll see I have the references for several journal articles. To persuade my reader of how these articles lead to that point, I'm going to point out how divorce is now easier to obtain, there's less blame now attached, and this of course doesn't explain why laws change. It's more important that those fundamental changes in society come first. For my link, I would look at examples of how these changes are considered in the next paragraph and potentially conclude this one this way. You can even use this as an essay planning strategy. Imagine if you had one of these tables for all of those 6 to 8 points in that 2,000 word essay. Yes, those tables would take a long time to construct, but when it came to writing, it would be simply an exercise of academic English and you wouldn't need to do much thinking at all. As such, this can be a really useful structure when you're thinking of any assignment. Let's have a look at this in a bit more detail. Here I have an example of a paragraph. I'm opening up with a point, and this is that a proportion of men could be imprisoned as a result of their biology. I then come in with some evidence, and the evidence suggests that some sex-linked genes have been associated with aggressive behaviour. I then link that to how that could explain how more men are imprisoned for violent crimes than women, in which I have further evidence with my references. I'm then going to link to an early bit in my essay, talking how, coupled with the high incidence of ADHD in prison inmates as discussed earlier, then move back into some more analysis, raising serious questions about the suitability of prison rather than psychiatric care for a significant portion of the current prison population. For this video's activity, I'm going to show you 2 paragraphs. You might need to pause the video while you read them. You need to consider which is the best paragraph and why. If you've not finished reading, pause the video now. So we can see that paragraph B is the best paragraph. This is because when we look at paragraph A, we'll see it is mostly evidence. There's very little argument in here. Yes, this student has done an awful lot of reading, and unfortunately, this is quite undervalued because while there's lots of evidence, it isn't really saying much. Paragraph B, on the other hand, has a clear point, evidence to back that up, and analysis which leads to how that goes back to the claim in the start of the paragraph.